Once again, another year of way too many games not getting the attention that they deserve. That's the bread and butter of this channel if you're unfamiliar. I'm finding the Valhalla Cyberpunk bartending simulators, the Wonder Songs, and the Never Awakes before anyone else does. This year, the cutoff for this list is 1,000 Steam reviews or less, or the equivalent if it doesn't happen on Steam, which sounds like a big hurdle, but really it isn't. Even games that I would still call overlooked, games like Cryptmaster and Mullet Madjack, go over that cutoff. And as you'll see, many of these on the list don't even come close to half of that. I want to focus on the true diamonds in the rough here, the ones that you have to dig to the bottom of the sea to find. Alright, enough of this intro. These are the top overlooked games of 2024. Number 15. Berserk Boy. Many people wanted this game based on its trailer to be a new Mega Man X game. I mean, I sorta did too. And those people probably were disappointed in the game to a certain extent. But that doesn't mean that Berserk Boy isn't worth playing. The game's strength lies in its speed platforming and switching between different powers, and it works rather well here, all in a colorful presentation and some good background music. There's a good variety of hazards, and the theming of the levels is good in terms of introducing a new issue for you to deal with your new power. And the fact is, the story is cheesy, but in the right ways. The reason why it's lower on the list is that this is a game that's very specific. If you want difficult Mega Man-like combat or boss fights, you're not gonna get it here. But if you like speed platforming, if you like speed-running games, this is more up your alley. And it's also the perfect kind of game that I want to see a sequel to, just to see what they learn from the original game, because there's a lot to improve on here, but still a lot to love. Number 14. Life Eater. I feel like I should just offer Xavier Nelson and Strange Scaffold a permanent spot in this list. They seem to be on it every year. He has some of the most unique games on the market, and this time, it's a horror fantasy kidnapping simulator. What fun! You stalk victims and try to find the right person to satisfy a specific objective, balancing resources of suspicion and time while not getting caught. The gameplay does enough to satisfy the puzzle player in you, while allowing for some creativity in a basic paranoia story on whether or not the god you are sacrificing to is actually real. It makes the list because it's extremely unique, just like every game in the Strange Scaffold branch. Get it. Number 13. Garbanzo Quest. Look, do you like weird platformers that are made by one person and remind you of ROM-hacked Mario games, and yet is a little bit more accessible, with characters that feel like they just dropped out of a 10-year-old sketchbook? Boy, do I have a very specific recommendation for you. The standout element is the level design, and how different each level feels from one to the next, still retaining certain aspects, but changing things up enough that you're always experiencing something newish, but also taking familiar elements from platformers past and remixing them wisely. There's some good comedic chops in the writing for the brief story updates, there's a bunch of secrets to find, and well, if there's one thing to sell you on the game, it's this. Of the total number of reviews of the game at the time of writing this video, none of them are negative. 0. That should tell you something for having over 100 reviews, that everyone seems to love it, and you will too. Number 12. Horticular. Or is it Horticular? I think it's Horticular. Regardless, take a little of Viva Pinata and SimCity and mix it together to get this game. This casual city-type builder is great for those who like the grind of looking for combination of things to open up new possibilities, while still making your own unique environment that plays to your own personal tastes and to show off to your friends. The ecosystem portion of building specific environments to get specific animals into your ecosystem is smartly designed and does really force you to think outside the box at times. It's the perfect type of game to listen to a YouTube video that has most of your focus, but you still give the game attention and play around with the new unlock and make everything pretty. It's the cozy game of this list, and well, it does its job rather well. If you want more information before you make a purchase, I do have a review on the channel, so you can always look it up. Number 11. Witchhand. Witchhand is a 4X card game along the likes of games like Stacklands that understands why people play these types of games. The controls are fantastically done, especially for someone like me who is OCD in placing things down. It has a bunch of tools to lock things into place and just understands the type of player that plays these type of games. But it's the different strategies that open up from different pathway and upgrades and win type conditions that will chew hours at a time out of your life. And its strong presentation gives you every piece of info you need without getting in the way. The different witches change things up enough to give you more reason for new runs, and it's just one of those games to pick up and play if you need to escape the grind of the world. And then you realize it's 1 AM and you should probably get to sleep. Yeah, I played this a little bit late into the night at times. That should tell you something. Number 10. Angelstruck. If you want arcade roguelike shooting for a cheap price, Angelstruck has the energy and the simple yet effective gameplay that can consume hours at a time. The pacing here is great, getting new abilities and weapon types and getting further and further along the arcade track, learning the little tricks to keep you alive despite there being repetition. The upgrade system helps, of course, but it's the neon visuals and rocking soundtrack that will keep your attention, along with just getting further and further. The controls are pretty much what you would want for a game like this, and there's good enemy variety to keep your attention, and really, it's the perfect game to play here and there for a round or two, slowly get better and better at, and eventually conquer as a whole. Number 9. Dunjungle. Or Dunjungle? Dunjungle. Dunjungle? You know what? It's Dunjungle. So I'll say this from the get-go. Dunjungle is not the type of action roguelike that I would consider balanced. I mean, it is in early access, but you can die rather quickly or be way overpowered in the blink of an eye. But the funny part about that is, that's sort of why I'm recommending it. Now, there's a good set of controls, weapon types, and powers to the game that serve as a good base for this combat, and enemy variety and boss fights do enough to change up the runs. There's good complementary sounds and sound design here, and the music is alright. And the presentation, while pixel in nature, still does a good job of giving you information and still being good to look at. But this is the type of game that I would be recommending for streamers, and the reason being is that you can have some of the most enjoyable runs by just putting together some of the most ridiculous builds. For example, when I streamed this, I built this sort of summon element with one of the character types, which there are a bunch of them, by the way, and it was just so fun getting to a boss and killing it within 3 seconds because I had summoned 35 slimes. It's just one of those games that you feel the power fantasy and just enjoy it. And the fact is, you can still die rather quickly if you don't pay attention. That build, I did die, and sort of because of my own fault. And that's the thing. It's still balanced somehow, even though it's not. Look, just play the game. Demo it or just watch somebody else play it, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Number 8. Slave 0X. Do you want a difficult 2D Ninja Gaiden-like with fighting game mechanics like parrying? Would you like it in a cyberpunk-like aesthetic with interesting characters and a story that's actually very overlooked for how well it presents itself in its short time. Do you want to hate yourself as you try a level for the 20th time? No, seriously, the difficulty here is nothing to shake a stick at, but it's also satisfying in a lot of ways. Is it foolproof in its design? No, but elements like the Fatal Sync, which you can recover your health and use EX moves during it at the right time, can get you through even the hardest fights. And the variety of pokes and combos will make you really appreciate the need for spacing correctly and keeping juggling going. Some of the enemies here really do become a real threat, and you always have to be watching exactly how you're putting yourself into more danger. 2 or 3 enemies in the right configuration can absolutely destroy you. The visuals are actually rather striking at times, especially with the detail with the billboards in the back and some of the graffiti. It actually is a little bit attention-grabbing in certain ways, and can also be a little bit of a preview of the story to come at times. The sound and music is rather well done, but it's all about the gameplay in the end here. Now, if you don't like difficult games, this isn't for you. But if you do, well, pick it up now. Number 7. Beat Slayer. There are certain mechanics in games that will always draw my attention when combined with others, and rhythm mechanics are definitely one of those at the top tier of that list. And Beat Slayer using it in a hack and slash environment definitely scratches my itch. The thing is, hack and slash type games already have a natural beat to them. I mean, that's why Hi-Fi Rush works so well. And with the enemy attacks, but in particular your movement, and putting it into a combo system to reward you in moving to that beat, does bring back ideas of games like Crypto the Necrodancer in the best of ways. There's good weapon variety here, and upgrades especially in the early going. And I do love the backdrop of urban Berlin and a dystopian-like control with radio waves. It fuels some fun characters and an actually interesting story. The combat is great, but is it perfect? No, there is some late game fatigue that happens here, and some fights do take a while. But the music quality is high and keeps your energy up. The visuals are striking, and it definitely is a game that I can get lost in for hours at a time. In fact, I really wish I had more time to play it during the year. It's the downside of these lists. In order to play enough to make the list and to give you guys quality, I don't get to play some of the games that are on this list as much as I wanted to. But Beat Slayer is going to be one I play at the start of the year, and stream. And if you want a full review of it, let me know. Number 6. Death of a Wish. One of the biggest things that always bothers me about modern day gaming discussion is the focus on graphical fidelity as opposed to purposeful art styling. Sure, am I surprised that Death of a Wish, with its chalk and kid-like drawing aesthetic, didn't get the eyeballs on it? No, I'm not. But I also know that the art style does well to complement the story of a man fighting against those who seemingly wronged him, while making you question if what he's saying is 100% true. But the big draw here is the fighting mechanics, and in particular, the precision blocking and dodging mechanics, mixed with some good varied weaponry. Oh, and the big gimmick, of course, that being the time rewinding. This isn't slowdown like Witch Time. This returns you to the start of the fight, with your health returning as well. But the catch here is that A, you only have a certain amount of rewinds before you hit a campfire to replenish, and the fact that your return point is to the health that you started the battle at, not at full. Each fight becomes a risk and reward and management game. Did I take enough damage this fight to really force me to think, yeah, I have to rewind because I need that maximum health to get through the next fights? Will repeating elements over and over again through the time system make me better as the fight goes along? The cycle here works extremely well, and the corruption system on top of it rewards players who is able to balance all the elements to it. It's of course fun and rewarding, and has all the cues of a combat system that may be the best action one I played this year. We always say don't judge a book by its cover, and in games that's definitely true. And Death of a Wish is the prime example of that. It's got so much meat on its bones that you're gonna be full for the next several days. Number 5. Thistlemine. Okay, this one hurts. Like, I know that you may look at the visuals here and say, it doesn't look anything special, it's just another indie RPG. But 5 user reviews? And didn't I just mention in the Death of a Witch section that don't judge a book by its cover? Thistlemine is a puzzle RPG, where each battle has a very select few set of solutions that can solve it. And you will have to figure out how to do it, but it's not going to be easy. It's smartly put together and has replayability because not only is there not always one solution all the time, sometimes getting through with certain items still in your inventory may allow you to get further into the complicated story about these afflicted creatures. It's not anything like Undertale, but I am interested in this world and what came of it. And some of these puzzles, while a little bit out there, did force me to really think, especially because I played it when there were no guides about it. Look, if you follow this channel, you know that every Fruit Bat Factory release that I cover has something that draws me to it, whether it be an incredible story of Mamaya or the chaos of 100% orange juice. Thistlemine is for that smart puzzle player who wants to dig their teeth into something and not look up the solution, because you'll rack your mind but also feel absolutely fantastic when you're able to figure it out in both the combat and the regular puzzles. Really, if you like anything like Baba Is You or Lorelei and the Laser Eyes and want something a little bit different and something that you can sink your teeth into, Thistlemine is it. And I better see more than 5 user reviews by the time next year comes around. Seriously, play it, please. Number 4. Bakeru. If you were to make a Japanese indie version of Super Mario Odyssey, this would be it. Yes, I know that Super Mario is Japanese. Listen, regardless of the comparison, what Bakeru does well is exploration platforming, letting you get lost in the heavily Japanese-influenced environment. In fact, this world is just Japan. The story is based on Japanese folklore and takes heroes from its writing and puts them into this colorful world. And it's a game where you can learn a lot about Japan. The collectibles and things you can find will give you fun facts and associated souvenirs of the various regions. And exploring can be fun. Movement feels natural for the level design here. And while I see comparisons to the mystical ninja Goemon series, I think that expectation will set some up for disappointment here. This is its own game, really focusing on lighthearted exploration and variety. Levels are vastly different from one to the next, and allows you to take in some of the great art assets and environment design here. There's good different types of enemies. The game is always playing with camera perspective and different types of goals, and the combat is surprisingly simple yet effective, even if it could use a difficulty boost in certain areas. This is the perfect type of game to give to your kids this holiday season, and have them learn a little bit, but also enjoy the gameplay left and right. And the fact is, it's chunky. The 60 plus levels, you'll get a good amount of content out of it. I mean, I actually want to also see how one could speedrun this game, because I feel like it could get really cheeky in that way. I mean, this is the developer behind Princess Peach Showtime and other sort of side stories of Nintendo, or side games of Nintendo, I should say. So if you're concerned about quality, don't be. Bakeru brings it, and brings it in a lot of different ways. Number 3. Bloomtown, A Different Story. While every game on this list is worthy of your time and money, I will say that the last 3 games on this list all vied for the #1 slot at some point, and Bloomtown certainly could have been #1 if I finished it before this list came out. Sadly, that was not meant to be, and the fact of the matter is, I've got a wedding that is happening at the end of February, so sort of need to focus on that, and the whole real life thing. But regardless, you should be paying attention to Bloomtown, because it's just fantastic across the board. Nevertheless, Bloomtown is heavily inspired by Persona, and it's got a combat system using a down system with elements and capture mechanics. There's a social system that upgrades relationships, and it also has a killer vocal soundtrack that will get in your head for days. And days. No, seriously, for days. I'm still listening to it at work. But just because it's heavily inspired by Persona doesn't make it feel like just a knockoff, because its story focusing on even younger children in a more rural town and the horrors that the town has under the surface feels personal to the writers that created it, yet tantalizing in the right ways. The thing about younger characters in games with a lot of dialogue like this game is that you have to have a real delicate touch in how annoying/youthful they can be. Too much and they can be way too annoying and you want to turn it off, but too little and they don't feel real. Luckily, Emily and Chester are siblings that are likable yet have their own good quirks, both good and bad. Ramona adds a good compliment to them, especially to Emily, and Hugo is the best boy, and if you say anything about him, I will rip you apart limb from limb as a fellow corgi lover. But the thing is, the story has emotional depth in the right ways, in both the character main stories and the side stories and relationships that you come across. There is legit trauma that many of these characters have to face, and the game does it masterfully while explaining what led to certain events, but also doesn't hold back on how much these horrors have really screwed with some characters. Ramona's story in particular hit me hard, and frankly, it's one of those games that understands that you can have happy and sad endings to stories, and yet have both feel fulfilling. But it's also complemented with good side content that makes you want to explore the world, see what fish you can catch, what equipment you can find, and what upgrades you can get that will make a difference in battle. It does actually really make a difference here. The combat system is familiar with Persona, but has its own flavor, in particular with its focus on statuses and how they can work off each other in terms of comboing for more damage or even isolating certain enemies. Elemental strengths and weaknesses feel significant, maybe too significant at times, but it allows for each character to have one extra buddy, and that allows for some good build opportunities and experimentation in terms of your character builds. Is it the most difficult? I would say no, but there are some battles that will take a bit out of you, especially if you're underleveled. And if you are trying to go through the game a little bit quickly, that can start to really become a challenge. There's not a lot of weaknesses in the game. The one I would say is that when it comes to an overarching plot beyond the children and beyond this family, it isn't necessarily that strong, or it makes you question exactly where this sort of threat is coming from. Now, with that said, could it explain that in the end of the game or towards the ending of the game and I just haven't played it? Yes, but as of right now, that is a weakness, and it's sort of why the game takes number 3. Still a very strong contender, and in other years, it could have taken number 1. It just has 2 other games before it. Number 2. Keylocker. I'm gonna be frank, this one also hurts, and in a different way than Thistlemine does. Because if you aren't aware, Munana, the developer behind this game, has indicated that if they don't get financial backing, it's most likely that the studio is going to have to close. It infuriates me that studios like Munana, which have produced fantastic games that are unique and interesting and make me want to dive into the world, can't get funding. And yet, something that was obviously a train wreck from the get-go in Suicide Squad does. I know there's 100 different reasons for that, but it's just, sometimes life isn't fair. And before people say this, yes, I said at one point that it wasn't as good as Virgo versus the Zodiac. To me, because of the story, themes, and characters, and what I like my stories to be about. But that doesn't mean it was overall worse, it just didn't fit me as well. And the fact is, I said both games are must-buys. That should tell you something. First of all, it shines in the strategic RPG combat area. The charge elements of attacks that have you really focus on the rhythm of hitting an attack, a la Paper Mario, with different types of weapons is a lot more fun than I make it sound, especially when you apply that to the defense blocking and how enemies can change up attacks and force you to really pay attention. Now, new players may get confused at first, but I would say please stay at it because of the depth of positioning, using your different attacks, balancing the defense and offense. This is an addictive of a strategy element that you will get in RPGs without becoming overly reliant on stats, grinding, and overly complicated mechanics. Like Virgo versus the Zodiac, Keylocker is filled with colorful characters, such as Rocket and Bobo, all fighting in a dystopian-type plot that's focused on electricity as a major resource, and how music can generate it, and yet it's banned. You can feel the rebellious soul embedded throughout the story's length, but it's also done reasonably in order to give the overall antagonists some complexity, and allows you to self-reflect upon the comparison to real-world issues. Mind you, it isn't overly preachy in a bad way. It allows you to consume without having to be a cheerleader, which is always a sign of a great writer behind the story. The colorful presentation and detailed character artwork draws you in, even with the heavy pixel emphasis. And the music, of course, being a key part of the game, because, you know, music, really draws out the energy and the emotional weight of story moments, while still being fantastic in its own right. And while I've said this already, I want to make it clear. The combat is one of the main driving forces in my recommendation. Not to say that the other parts aren't worth their recommendation alone, but don't allow simple short segments in this video to possibly mislead you in thinking that it's just a simple RPG. Boss fights are fantastic and test your mettle, and the difficulty is adaptable and yet does force a challenge through the different levels of accessibility. And I put the combat in the form of a battle system equivalent to Tetris, looking simple on the surface, but having amazing depth and complexity as time goes on, as you play more and more. Look, despite being number 2 on this list, I would probably say that you should buy Keylocker first, due to Munana's current situation, but to hopefully get a bandwagon of people recommending this fantastic game to the next person. I'm sorry, there should be no situation where the developer is facing closure when it's produced 2 of the games that I put in the top 10% of games I've played in the last 5 years. Probably even top 5%, which is saying something because when I do these lists, I usually have 70 games or so played in 1 year. That's out of 350. Seriously, don't miss this one. Please? For me? And finally, number 1. Fallen Leaf. When it came down to it, Fallen Leaf took the top spot on this list for not being expected. Between the top 3 contenders, I knew that Keylocker was going to be great given Munana's history. I mean, yeah, maybe other people didn't know about it, but I knew. Bloomtown had the Persona direct pull. Not many indie games pull off that comparison off in the trailer, and I knew it would bring eyes to it and would probably be of quality. But when you look at Fallen Leaf on the surface looks like another platformer with good pixel graphics and another platformer in a very saturated genre. And yet, when streaming and fully playing through the game, I found one of the most well-designed platformers which understood not only the genre that it was playing in, but it was filled with heart, soul, and everything that you would want from the first moments to the last crescendo of gameplay. Delta Shore Games is someone to watch going forward. It has already earned a spot on my Indie Wall Hall of Fame. Yes, I know, it's just a leaf, but it's a fallen leaf. Get it? Okay, there's not exactly much for me to put there, okay? Hopefully one day there will be. Hint, Delta Shore Games. I know that you probably don't have the finances to do that, but please? The game's fantastic controls with each of the characters present takes advantage of some of the best level design that I have seen in ages. And that is incredibly hard to pull off because of the different movement patterns and abilities of each character. I can't even imagine how many iterations in QA and refinement in code it took to get there, because the game has an absolute sweet spot in terms of one character being able to get through certain sections of a level just fine, but being optimized to switching to another character to make it easier. And yet, any character can typically make it through the section as well, which again is just absurd in how precise that has to be in order to allow that while still having difficulty to it. And those levels hit a variety of different concepts, enemy hazards and traps, and secrets that made sense, and yet wouldn't drive you up the wall trying to find them. It's clear that the game took some of the best platforming games of the past, like Mega Man and Shovel Knight, and adapted them into their game while still keeping it original in the process. Sure, you will recognize enemies in terms of how they move and how they attack, but they are always done in a way that still feels a little bit different and more of a nod to games of the past. I mean, there's nostalgia left and right here, whether it's sci-fi, 80s and 90s TV, or just anime in general, but most of it is gaming, and gaming as a whole, especially when it comes to enemy variety. But it's still clear that this developer loves games and cherishes them, which, when a game can show you its heart that quickly, you know that there's something good under the surface, if not fantastic. The music, Jesus Christ, the music. It is just some of the best I've heard in indie games, so much so that, here, take a listen. Hear what I'm talking about without me talking over it. The presentation has fantastic elements in the pixel artwork, especially in character animations and portraits. You always see what's going on, you don't have to squint your eyes, and yet it is able to get emotion out of me. But what puts it over the top was the little details. Those moments in a game that make you realize how much love was put into it. Rerez did a fantastic video on the concept, and he called it the ice bucket. The interactables are small details that can be easily missed, and yet if you dig in, you'll find more and more depth to the story and or gameplay. Things like taking a specific character back to one NPC that they are obviously related to and talking to them, getting a whole new story branch. Or things like a character remembering the last time you talked to them, giving you an indication that it's been X amount of time since you did, down to the second. The thing is, these aren't used as a, oh, look how clever we are item either. They are embedded for you to enjoy and find on your own. I've always said the devil is in the details, and that some of the best games you can really tell how good a game is when it gets these little details right. And well, Fallen Leaf is the best example of how to get the little details right. Look, I know that you have looked at the last 5 minutes and may have not been convinced in terms of the presentation gameplay, but I am telling you, this is one of the best platformers that may be on the level of Shovel Knight. That may be controversial, but if it's not right on the level, it's right barely below it. And for a game that doesn't even have 200 reviews yet. It's just sad that it hasn't gotten the attention that it's deserved. And some of the attention it has gotten was for things that, well, let's just say they're stupid in the big picture. Anyway, that's it for my overlooked games of the year list. And I thank you for your patience. I know it's been a while since I've made content, but it's just, my age is catching up to me a little bit, but also, you know, wedding, work, life, a lot is going on. If you like this video, please share it with a friend, and maybe purchase a game or two that's, you know, highlighted, and maybe mention that Dragnix point of view to it. You know, I like a little bit of credit for it, but regardless, hit that like button if you want more content like this. Subscribe if you want more videos like this, or go follow me on Twitch to see more indie games being played. I'm going to start up Twitch again this year. Well, you know, the start of the year after taking a little 2-week, 3-week hiatus. The Remake Remastered Part 1 video is going to be the next video on this channel. It has been in the process and working. It's just, I want to do a little bit more with it. I want to try new editing styles, new editing, you know, effects. So it's just taking more time than it usually does. Anyway, thank you as always. And as always, keep on gaming.